And people thought Quebec politics was a dysfunctional hot mess, which it is. But there will be other videos to talk about that, and I will. Well, tonight, as you guessed, we're going to talk about the next chapter of the shit show that is the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party. Or more specifically, you guessed it, Duggy the Druggy Ford. And we'll get right into it shortly. Good evening, boys and girls. How goes it? Welcome to Cranky Gen Xer's Corner. And I am CK, where we will provide political commentary. For those of you who don't know me, I used to be a DJ from an online radio station where I hosted an oldie show along with a blues and classic rock show. I also used to have a blog, Sister Sage's Musings, for many years, where I provided my own 2 cents, whether it was asked for or not. I found as of late, I was missing those days, and I want to stage a comeback of sorts. So here we are. I started with another YouTube channel, Fedora Hippies, which is primarily a mental health awareness channel, providing commentary, story time, vlogs of a somewhat personal nature with guests, along with fun stuff like product and show reviews, humorous cooking shows, and other fun stuff. I will leave the link below in the description box, and I invite you to subscribe to Fedora Hippies as well as here. Cranky Gen Xer is exclusively a channel for political commentary, much in the same style that Sister Sage's was. But of course, you get to see my mug. So, enough about that. On to the latest news happening in Ontario politics, where the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party has been making a 3-ring circus look like a military barracks inspection. Just months before the upcoming June 7th provincial election, the Ontario PCs elected their new leader to replace Patrick Brown, who was forced to resign after allegations of sexual harassment on 2 young women came to light. I'm sure there's more going to coming out in the weeks and months ahead. He really was a train wreck. So what did the party do? Well, they elected another train wreck, of course, in Duggy the Druggy Ford. Yeah. For those of you who need a reminder, he is the brother of the late Robbo Ford, former mayor of Toronto, who made Toronto pretty much a laughing stock when it was found that he was smoking crack. But more about that later. Duggy ran against a dilettante in Caroline Mulroney, daughter of a former Canadian Prime Minister. Yeah, you guessed it, kids. Lion Brian Mulroney. He who arguably can be said that began the destruction of the old federal Progressive Conservative Party before old Petey McKay hammered the final nails on that coffin. Of course, she has 0 political experience. That to say, she never ran for office before. An expected top job just because she was Brian's daughter. Along with Carolyn and Duggy, we had the establishment candidate running as the least crazy, Christine Elliott, former longtime MPP who ran for leadership 3 times and lost. She is the widow of our former HarperCon finance minister, Deficit Jim Flaherty. And lastly, SoCon, because every Conservative party has to have one of those. Tanya Granick Allen, who predictably came in last place. Blech. Easy for me to say. It appears, however, she and her supporters made Duggy Ford king. Will she and her other SoCon friends regret it? That remains to be seen. That whole debacle ended as it started, chaotically. Is that even a word? It was a tight race where the official count ended in the middle of the night press conference because the convention organizers only booked the room till a certain time, apparently, and had to vacate it because the room was going to be used for something else. Ooh, more poor planning? The voting process, of course, was riddled with technical issues. Yesterday, the news kept changing. What had happened was Christine Elliott, who had won the popular vote, but Duggy had more points? Convoluted system? At first, I thought the party ran its leadership races much like the American Electoral College. Visions of Clinton-Trump 2016 showdown, kids. Well, let's take a brief look at this. Though the rules of the Ontario PC leadership race give all members of the party the right to vote, all votes are not necessarily created equally. The preferential ballot allows voters to rank the candidates. If no candidate earns a majority of first-choice electoral votes, the last-place candidate is eliminated along with any other candidate with fewer than 10% of the votes. The eliminated candidates' votes are then redistributed according to who was ranked next on their supporters' ballots. This process continues until one candidate receives a majority of electoral votes. And Grenier continues, the equal weighting of each riding also makes some votes count more than others. Each of Ontario's 124 ridings will be up to 100 electoral votes. If a riding sees fewer than 100 ballots cast, each member's vote in that riding is worth one electoral vote. In a riding with more than 100 votes, which is a vast majority of them, each candidate is awarded electoral votes equal to the percentage of votes they received in the riding. In other words, regardless of whether a riding has 100 or 1,000 members, a candidate who receives 40% support from that riding gets 40 electoral votes. This makes some party members worth more than others. Northern Ontario Party members living in ridings with fewer than 100 voting members, for example, will find that their ballots weigh many times as much as those cast by people living in some ridings in the Greater Toronto Area where there are 5,000 or more eligible voters. So in the Ontario PC leadership race, where a candidate's supporters live, could turn out to be more important than how many individual supporters the candidate had. In the end, fewer than 150 points separated Ford and Elliott when all the ballots had been counted. In a late-night statement, her team said it identified entire towns voting in the wrong riding. Most importantly, thousands of members have been assigned to incorrect ridings. For example, Mount Hope, inside of Hamilton, had its members assigned to Chatham-Kent, several hundred kilometers away. However, voting irregularities were cited from Team Elliott, and she was going to contest the result. That is, until she changed her mind and decided to drop all complaints, whether or not they're legitimate. She is throwing her support behind Duggy in the name of party unity. Yep, she changed her mind rather quickly. It does beg the question, though. What exactly did Duggy offer her in exchange? What is the quid pro quo here? I do not believe for 1 second any seasoned politician would drop anything for altruistic reasons that she cites, which mainly is to unite the PCs to defeat incumbent Premier Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals. Now, let's get to know Duggy the Druggy Ford, shall we? Or rather, a refresher course. He and his late brother Rob Ford did a ham-fisted job running Toronto when Rob was mayor and Duggy played councillor, which in Duggy's job description meant basically playing bouncer to kid brother Rob. Yes, kids, the same Rob Ford who, thanks to late-night TV, became the laughingstock. News developed that he indeed was a crack addict, and photos surfaced of him hanging with rather dubious, unsavory characters at crack houses. The brothers who invented Trumpian politics before, well, even Trumpy. Make no mistake, the Ford family business, Deco Labels and, I forgot the name, it'll come back to me later. Besides running a print shop, Apparently also involves drugs. From the Globe and Mail, published May 25th, 2013. This investigative report reveals that Doug Ford, Toronto Mayor Rob Ford's brother, sold hashish for several years in the 1980s. Another brother, Randy, was also involved in the drug trade and was once charged in a relation to a drug-related kidnapping. Don't know about you kids. Sunday dinner might be fun at their household. Their sister Kathy has been the victim of a drug-related gun violence. Again, from the Globe and Mail in May 25th, 2013. He and his family's checkered past could and would likely be fodder for upcoming attack ads. But one thing I've noticed, even with those conservatives who deem themselves having the highest of moral standards, will look away and, yes, even defend him to the max, just as they did for Rob when he was caught up in the crack smoking debacle. Just as Patrick Brown supporters will continue to do to portray him as a man whose career was simply ruined by some angry women. I've long ago come to the conclusion that any and all questionable behavior is accepted as long as you're a conservative right-winger. If a liberal or anyone left of con so much was caught with a joint or a can of beer, they would and have been crucified. Anyway, make no mistake, Duggy will run a copycat campaign as he did with Rob when he was running for the mayor of Toronto in 2010. In fact, let's play a game. Every time we hear the words from Duggy and his cheerleaders like elites, respect for the taxpayer, efficiencies, gravy train, take a drink. Yep, still valid today. But only, this time, picture the building being Queen's Park instead of Toronto City Hall. And Duggy running that train instead of Rob. And yeah, I'm pretty sure Don Cherry, in all his glory and his best Liberace ripoffs, would be only too happy to drive that train for Duggy the Druggy. Oops. On second thought, better rethink that. We may well die from alcohol poisoning before E-Day. Scrap that. Speaking of gravy trains, one boneheaded idea of Councillor Duggy's was to derail existing plans at the time at Toronto's waterfront, which would have been costly in and of itself. But he wanted to put up a Ferris wheel. Yay! A Ferris wheel, like, that is so essential. Count on more redonkulous spending ideas like that should he become premier. Another blast to the past, and here's another reminder of Duggy's thuggish behavior. He apparently sympathizes with youth who have mental health issues, autism, and intellectual delays. No, really, he does. Scout's honor. Just not in his neighborhood, as he crassly led a NIMBY movement of sorts in his Etobicoke neighborhood when Griffin House, a group home for such youth, moved there. He says, and I quote, "My heart goes out to kids with autism, but no one told me they'd be leaving the house. If it comes to it, I'll buy the house myself and resell it," Duggy Ford said. Shocker. These kids actually leave the home and are unleashed on an unsuspecting bedroom community. Oh, the horror. What did he think happened with those kids? That they were locked in a dungeon, and if they ate their mutton and gruel, they could sit in the living room for about 15 minutes? It should be added that he never apologized for that statement. Oh, hell no. No. Since when do Fords ever apologize? Okay, well, it's rare anyway. He doubled down and then doubled down. In fact, in 2014, he told the father of an autistic child to go to hell. Ain't that classy? The scary thing is that it is likely that many who do remember that actually agree with Duggy's assessment of that. Yes, in fact, Duggy Ford plans to scrap increases on mental health spending, which was a part of Patty Brown's old platform. Duggy will, throughout this campaign, and surely continue if he becomes premier, do as he and his brother did back when they were councillor and mayor. Blame everybody for their shortcomings on the police, media, left of center people, environmentalists, cyclists, etc., etc., etc. Sound familiar? It should. Our former Prime Minister, old Stevie Harper, did keep an enemies list, which included those dastardly birdwatchers. After attending an evangelical church in T.O. to play born-again Christian, he appears to have the backing and the blessing of the religious right. In fact, they appear to be crediting themselves for Duggy's win of the leadership, just as they had for Speaker Andy, aka Andrew Scheer's leadership win of the Conservative Party of Canada. Methinks those groups will be demanding payback should Duggy become premier. He is now insisting that minors must ask their parents authorization for an abortion. That may be unconstitutional. For one, doctor-patient confidentiality is sacrosanct. Next, that may well run amok of a Supreme Court of Canada decisions, 1988's Morgentaler v. the Queen and 1989's Tremblay v. Daigle. Not to mention, there would be serious consequences to this, like subjecting already potentially distraught young women to violence. And here are a few more campaign promises to date. That is, of the socially conservative variety. Oh, let's see. Ford declared he is going to repeal the sex ed curriculum, full stop. Yeah, that ought to end well. Yeah, why not? Let's scrap the mandatory sex ed because Lord knows kids are getting adequate knowledge on the subject from their parents or the streets. Never mind that it has been proven time and again in the Bible Belt states where abstinence only is preached, teen pregnancies are at a far higher rate. Let's see, what else? Ford said he opposes the Protecting a Woman's Right to Access Abortion Services Act. I will leave an article below in the description box explaining that for those who are interested. A law that prohibits anti-abortion activists from protesting and harassing women at the entrances to abortion clinics. Yeah, okay, good luck with that, because that's always worked out well, tormenting already vulnerable, tormented women who made this uneasy decision to go seek an abortion in the first place. Nonetheless, I wonder about the constitutionality of that. And lastly, Ford also said he would allow Ontario doctors to refuse to refer patients to other doctors when they object to medical treatments on moral or religious grounds such as abortion or euthanasia. Yeah. He may also have some problems with the last part, constitutionally speaking. Again, with refusing to refer a patient for an abortion would be indeed unconstitutional. So would refusing to refer a patient for medically assisted suicide, for that matter. In fact, the Ontario Superior Court had already ruled last January that doctors who, for whatever reason, cannot carry out a medically assisted suicide must refer those patients to other doctors who can assess these patients and, if need be, provide medically assisted suicide. No matter, like Trumpy, something tells me that court rulings of any kind mean very little to Duggy the Druggy. Yep, they meant little to Harper too, our old Prime Minister. Now today he appears to be somewhat backing down on some of those so-called promises he made. before he became elected leader. Uh-oh. Them church people ain't gonna like that. Oh, no, they won't. He also vowed to remove the carbon tax as well. Of course he will. Wouldn't expect anything less. Oh, and here's his answer to the potential economic shortfall of this move. Basically, to find efficiencies at Queen's Park. Efficiencies. What does that even mean, Duggy? Efficiencies, as we all know, is code for cuts. Austerity, baby. Despite my knowing what it means, he should define it. But he won't. It appears Duggy Ford's magic number is $6 billion in cuts. Where will he find 6 billion bananas to cut? It should be noted that in the first PC leadership candidates debate, Duggy seemed to have a really hard time to pop some veins in that brain of his to name any program that needed cutting. There's a comforting thought. And where have we heard this before? Ah, yes, back to baby brother Robbo's gravy train where he insisted that Toronto didn't have a revenue problem. It had a spending problem. Yeah, that worked out well, didn't it? He himself did have to increase property taxes, among other things, during his tenure. Nevertheless, it worked for baby brother, so why wouldn't it work for him in a provincial campaign? Count on him to scale back any environmental protections implemented in the past. As mentioned, he already plans to scrap the carbon tax and is likely to oppose Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's national carbon pricing, coming at him with both barrels. He also plans to cut programs to encourage clean energy sources that were implemented by the current Liberal government. About that, $14 an hour hike in minimum wage. Business groups of Ontario have been whining about how this new $14 an hour minimum wage was implemented last January. And yes, they have been successful at scaring lower wage earners to speak out against it, despite the fact that this hike benefits them. The minimum wage is supposed to be hiked again sometime next year to about $15 an hour. He apparently pledges to freeze the minimum wage at $14. So, if he becomes premier, I think that scheduled hike next year to $15 an hour would likely be canceled. He also plans to slash corporate taxes in Ontario, thus creating further monetary shortfalls. Eek! More austerity, baby. Woo! And more tax cuts! He also promised an incentive to doctors who practice in Northern Ontario to pay zero taxes. Zilch. Nada. He made this promise, apparently, while on a recent visit to Thunder Bay. As for the hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs lost in Ontario, he is promising to get them back. Right out of the Trumpy playbook, wouldn't you say? Never mind that Trumpy hasn't been able to actually deliver to date. And Duggy won't either, for pretty much the same reasons. You see, not only have manufacturing jobs have been lost to overseas where labor standards are lax or to so-called right-to-work states, but mainly these manufacturing jobs became obsolete thanks to automation, which nobody has found a solution for. So how would Duggy be able to find a solution to automation? Well, to be fair, this is a question pondered by far bigger minds than any Ford brother or family member. If you ask me, the only solution for the future is a guaranteed basic income. Speaking of which, that 3-year guaranteed basic income pilot project in Hamilton that Kathleen Wynne's government implemented last year, I think it's a safe bet that Duggy will put an end to that despite it having positive results after a year in. But I digress. Also, as mentioned, with about the $6 billion in cuts, he will cut thousands of jobs, of course, as critics are saying. So let me get this straight. He's going to create jobs and cut them at the same time. Looks like I'm getting a sense of deja vu right now. Looking like shades of Timmy Hudak here. As a reminder, the Hudak math basically was cutting 100,000 jobs to create 1 million of them. Apparently, Duggy even wants to put up a sign at the border saying Ontario is open for business. Yes, he wants to provide those tax incentives to attract big business. He, of course, insists it's not corporate welfare. Dude, what would you call it then? He is, of course, promising less wait times for healthcare, promising new resources. What does that even mean? He really should define resources as it festers in a Ford mind, because something tells me it's much different than how the rest of us view healthcare resources. Also, he says he will find efficiencies in the healthcare system. Ooh, there's that word again. Also says that services will be better delivered. Duggy, not sure if you're stoned right now, but you might want to talk to Quebec frontline healthcare and social workers who ain't exactly feeling the love from our Gaetan Barrette's efficiencies and so-called better deliveries of services, which is, to put it mildly, an epic clusterfuck. Just a side note, my next video will be part 1 of Quebec's healthcare crisis. It's a series that I'm planning. Anyways, onward. Very short on policy, obviously, but when you're a right-wing populist, who cares, right? The economic policies I've seen so far beg one question. Has Duggy been smoking some holdover hash from the 80s? I have noticed on my social media feeds many who underestimate the power of Ford and believe he is unelectable. Let's remember, many of us thought that Stevie Harper and his far-right evangelical ways were unelectable too. But he ended up prime minister for almost a decade, and a rather painful one at that. Ooh. The last 4 in a majority situation. Yeah, it was cringeworthy. Let us all also remember that the late Robbo Ford was also thought to be unelectable. But we know what happened, don't we, boys and girls? If I were a betting woman, I would predict right now that not only will Duggy become Premier of Ontario, but he could take it in a landslide. You see, in the vote-rich GTA, there are many outside of Ford's home of Etobicoke who long for the return of Ford Nation. The 905 belt appeared to be quite enamored with him as well. As for the rural ridings, they will eat this anti-elitism rhetoric with a spoon. Count on him to play the urban Canadian v. rural Canadian, and how the latter are getting the shaft continuously. For those reasons mentioned, it is likely that these very same business groups railing against the new $14 an hour minimum wage will be spending lots of money and energy campaigning against Win and for Ford. I'm afraid strategic voting would be in order here come June 7th. I believe that not only Duggy the Druggy's Premier's office would be a hot mess, but the shit show that continues to plague the Ontario PCs will continue in the public eye. Oh well, if anything, it could be entertaining. Get the popcorn, kids! No doubt, much in the same way Trumpy and his flunkies are doing all to destroy the White House, count on Duggy the Druggy destroying Queen's Park. I also strongly believe that Duggy the Druggy will make Mikey Harris look like a raving Marxist should he win this June. Because something tells me those cuts are going to rival his at the very least. I can just imagine the televised debates come election season. I remember Duggy and Robbo not actually debating at City Hall, but rather having temper tantrums rivaling those of a toddler with the worst case of the terrible twos. I'm pretty sure Kathleen Wynne and the Ontario NDP leader, Andrea Horwath, are going to find that debating Duggy the Druggy is like playing chess with an irate pigeon. I will leave you with this. According to Duggy's LinkedIn page, which appears to have been updated to reflect his new position as leader of the Ontario PCs, also still has him as president of the family business, Deco Labels and Flexible Packaging. You see, I told you kids I would get the full name of it later. Not sure if that is a conflict of interest according to Ontario laws at Queen's Park, but I would say it would be so should he become premier. Check if he does the right thing and resigns as president and puts in shares in the blind trust or whatever Ontario law dictates. It's questions that will need to be asked, especially close to the election campaign. Good luck, Ontario, come June. You're gonna need it. That's it for me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. More content in the near future, such as a multi-part series on the crisis of healthcare, as I mentioned earlier. I should have part 1 up in a few days, talking about the nursing crisis. Good night, boys and girls.